Ladies and gentlemen, friends, today I want to remind you of a truth that the world often forgets. No matter how deep your sorrow, no matter how heavy your burden, God is near and help is on the way. Life has a way of bringing tears to our eyes. Sometimes it's the pain of loss, the struggle of unmet expectations, or the weight of problems that seem bigger than us. Yet, even in those moments, God is not distant. He is closer than your heartbeat, whispering hope to your weary soul. The psalmist David said, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." Psalm 3:18. Notice, it's not a promise for when things are easy. It's a promise for when you're broken, when tears flow freely, and when despair threatens to overwhelm. God's nearness brings strength. His presence brings perspective, and his help arrives often in ways we cannot yet see. Sometimes help comes through people, sometimes through circumstances, but always through his timing, which is perfect, even when it feels late. So when the storm rages, do not despair. Do not assume that God has forgotten you. Instead, lift your eyes, lift your heart, and trust that even in tears, God is near and help will come. Remember, tears are not the absence of God. They are often the pathway to his intervention. And the moment we surrender our pain to him, we open the door for his help to transform our situation. Hold fast, my friends, because your breakthrough is coming. Your help is on the way. God is near, and he will never leave you alone in your tears. There are moments in life when sorrow arrives unexpectedly, catching us off guard, and it feels as though the entire world has turned its back on us. Perhaps it is the loss of a loved one, the collapse of a dream we have held on to for years, or the heavy burden of repeated disappointments. In those moments, our hearts ache, our tears flow freely, and our minds are filled with questions. Why is this happening? Where is the help I so desperately need? In the midst of such grief, it can feel as if God is distant, as if he has turned a blind eye to our suffering. But the truth, the profound truth that must anchor our souls is that God is closer than we can possibly imagine, even when sorrow surrounds us. The very act of feeling sorrow, of experiencing deep emotional pain, does not indicate abandonment. On the contrary, it is often in those moments of brokenness that God draws closest to us. Consider the human experience of grief. Tears are universal. Every culture, every generation, every person encounters moments that bring sadness and despair. Yet in every case, there is a common thread. The awareness of something missing, something needed, something beyond human ability to fix. This awareness, this sense of inadequacy and need is exactly where God meets us. The psalmist recognized this when he said, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." It is not when life is easy or when everything is going according to plan that God's presence is most evident. It is when we are crushed, overwhelmed, and grieving that we sense his nearness the most. Our sorrow becomes the soil in which the roots of divine comfort can grow. Being near does not mean that God immediately removes the pain or that he always delivers a miraculous rescue according to our timetable. His nearness is not about bypassing the human experience of suffering. It is about walking with us through it. God's presence becomes tangible in ways that human comfort cannot replicate. It may be a quiet whisper in your heart reminding you that you are not alone. It may be a sudden clarity in the middle of confusion, a gentle nudge that points you to hope. It may even be a stranger's act of kindness or an unexpected answer to a prayer. In all these ways, God draws near to meet us where we are, to remind us that we are not forsaken. Sorrow, while painful, also opens the door for intimacy with God. When life is easy, we can overlook his presence, distracted by comfort and routine. But when life challenges us, when our hearts are heavy with grief, we are forced to look up, to seek help beyond ourselves. In these moments, our prayers become more sincere, our dependence on God more profound, and our awareness of his nearness more acute. Sorrow exposes our fragility, but it also exposes the power and presence of God. It reminds us that we are not meant to face life alone. Even when the night seems endless and the tears will not stop, God is walking beside us. It is important to understand that the nearness of God is not conditional upon our strength, our understanding, or our ability to cope. God does not draw near only when we are resilient or when we have figured out the right way to respond to hardship. He draws near simply because he is love, because his nature is to care, and because he is present for those who call out to him. This means that no matter how deep the sorrow, no matter how long the season of tears, God's presence is constant. There is a divine closeness that cannot be measured by circumstance, a nearness that does not fade when life becomes complicated, and a comfort that surpasses understanding. When we accept this truth, our perspective on sorrow begins to shift. Tears are no longer evidence of abandonment, but proof of our humanity and the opportunity for God's intimacy. Painful experiences, instead of being solely moments of despair, become moments where God's presence can be most profoundly felt. Our brokenness, rather than isolating us from him, draws him closer. It is a paradox of faith. In the places where we feel weakest, God's presence shines brightest. And so, even in the midst of sorrow, even when the night is dark and the tears seem endless, we can hold on to the promise that God is near. He does not leave us to navigate grief alone. He does not turn his back when life becomes unbearable. His present. He is not a distant hope, but an immediate reality, a constant companion through the valleys of pain. In every tear, in every ache, in every moment of loneliness, God's nearness remains, reminding us that we are never truly alone, that help is not far off, and that comfort is available even when sorrow feels overwhelming. It is a common misconception that when life becomes unbearably hard, when sorrow overwhelms our hearts, or when tears flow uncontrollably, God has somehow turned his back on us. Many people look at their pain and think, if God truly cared, this wouldn't be happening. But that assumption could not be further from the truth. Tears are not evidence of God's absence. They are evidence of the depth of life, the weight of love, and often the nearness of God himself. To cry does not mean we are forsaken. In fact, tears are sometimes the very language through which God communicates his presence and care. When we allow ourselves to weep, to feel deeply, we acknowledge that we are human, that life carries burdens too heavy for us to carry alone. Tears are honest. They are the soul's way of expressing the pain, grief, and longing that words alone cannot convey. And it is in this vulnerability that God meets us. He does not turn away from our sorrow. He does not judge the depth of our tears or the frequency of our weeping. Instead, he leans in, offering comfort that the world cannot provide. The psalmist captures this truth beautifully when he says, he heals the broken-hearted and binds up their wounds. Notice the emphasis. God is intimately involved in the process of healing, right in the midst of our brokenness. Our tears are not a sign of abandonment. They are an invitation for God's restorative presence to enter. It is crucial to understand that God's methods of comfort are not always dramatic or immediately visible. Often, his presence is quiet, gentle, and persistent. We may feel as though our prayers echo into emptiness or that our cries go unheard, but God is listening, watching, and working behind the scenes. Tears do not mean that God has stopped paying attention. They mean that he is orchestrating something far greater than we can see. Life's pain can feel isolating, but it is precisely in these moments that God draws near, gently reminding us that he has not abandoned us. Moreover, tears often serve a higher purpose. They are part of God's way of refining our hearts and deepening our faith. Just as physical pain alerts us to injury, emotional pain signals areas in our lives that need God's intervention, healing, and attention. Every tear can be transformed into testimony, every moment of grief into a stepping stone towards spiritual growth and greater intimacy with God. It is through sorrow that we learn dependence, patience, and the profound truth that we cannot navigate life alone. Tears become the bridge between human frailty and divine strength, allowing God's presence to be revealed in ways that are sometimes invisible to the world, but unmistakable to the owl. In Scripture, we find numerous examples of God's people experiencing deep sorrow without being abandoned. David, a man after God's own heart, wept over his losses, his fears, and his failures, yet God never left him. Hannah, pouring out her soul in silent desperation, wept before the Lord, and her tears were not wasted. They led to the birth of a prophet. Jesus himself wept at the tomb of Lazarus, showing us that tears are not shameful or weak. They are a part of the human experience that God himself embraces. In all these instances, the tears are not a sign of divine neglect, but of God's engagement with his children. It is also important to remember that God's timing is often different from ours. Tears may flow long before the answer comes. Grief may linger. Uncertainty may persist, and pain may continue, but none of this indicates abandonment. God works in seasons, and he sees the bigger picture that our finite minds cannot. Even when we feel that our cries are unnoticed, they are recorded in heaven, cherished, and held with eternal significance. Each tear matters to God. Each sigh matters. Each silent heartbreak is heard. The Creator of the universe has not left us in our sorrow. He is actively involved in shaping a future where our pain will give way to joy, our mourning will be turned into dancing, and our weeping will be replaced by laughter. Understanding that tears do not indicate abandonment changes how we respond to suffering. Instead of succumbing to despair, we can approach our sorrow with trust, knowing that God is present and that his purposes are unfolding. Our tears become a sacred dialogue with the divine, a testimony of vulnerability that strengthens faith, and a pathway through which God's comfort flows. When we embrace this truth, grief loses its power to isolate, and sorrow transforms into an opportunity for divine intimacy, reassurance, and hope. One of the hardest lessons in life is learning to wait. When challenges press in, when pain feels unbearable, when our hearts long for relief, the natural instinct is to demand immediate answers, to wish for instant solutions, or to try to fix things ourselves. Yet, one of the most profound truths of faith is that help comes in God's timing, not ours. The Creator of the universe, the one who holds the stars in place and knows the number of hairs on our heads, operates according to a divine timetable far beyond human understanding. While we may grow impatient, frustrated, or even despairing, his timing is perfect, and his help will arrive at precisely the right moment. Understanding God's timing begins with recognizing that he sees the bigger picture. Human perspective is limited. We see only what is immediately in front of us, our pain, our confusion, our urgency. But God sees the entirety of our lives from beginning to end. He knows how each event, each setback, and each tear fits into the intricate tapestry of our journey. Because of this, his timing is not random or accidental. It is intentional and precise. Sometimes it may feel like help is delayed, but what appears to us as delay may actually be preparation, protection, or the perfect orchestration of events for our ultimate good. Waiting on God's timing also strengthens faith. When help comes instantly, it is easy to attribute it to luck or coincidence rather than divine intervention. But when we wait, when we trust in the midst of uncertainty, our reliance on God grows. We learn patience, endurance, and a deeper intimacy with him. Waiting is not passive. It is an active engagement of faith, an acknowledgement that God is at work even when we cannot see the immediate results. The Apostle Paul reminds us that all things work together for good for those who love God, even when the process is invisible and the timing feels slow. It is also important to recognize that God's timing often comes through ordinary channels. Help may not appear in the way we envision. It may come through people, through opportunities, through circumstances that we would not have anticipated. Perhaps a job opens up, a friend reaches out, a solution emerges from an unexpected quarter. These are not coincidences. They are the manifestations of God's perfect timing. When we are attuned to His presence, we begin to see how He orchestrates every detail, arranging life in ways that serve His purpose and our ultimate well-being. Learning to recognize these moments is part of trusting His timing. Patience in God's timing requires surrender. It requires letting go of the need to control outcomes and acknowledging that our plans are limited while His are infinite. We must release the illusion that we can force life to conform to our desires and accept that God's wisdom far exceeds our own. This surrender is not a sign of weakness, but of strength, for it demonstrates trust in a God who loves us, knows our needs, and is committed to bringing help at the right moment. Our role is not to force the solution, but to remain faithful, watchful, and responsive to the opportunities God presents along the way. Scripture is filled with examples of God's perfect timing. Abraham waited decades for the fulfillment of God's promise of a son. Joseph endured years of betrayal, imprisonment, and hardship before rising to a position where he could save nations. Jesus Himself came at the perfect moment in history to bring salvation to the world. In each instance, God's help did not arrive according to human expectations, but it arrived at exactly the right time to accomplish His purposes. These examples remind us that waiting does not mean God has forgotten us or that our pain is meaningless. His timing is a part of His plan, and His help is guaranteed when the moment is right. Waiting for God's timing also develops character. In the process, we learn resilience, humility, and faithfulness. We discover that our identity is not dependent on immediate solutions or external circumstances, but on the unchanging present, and promises of God. The waiting season can teach us lessons that the receiving season alone could never impart. It cultivates trust in God's wisdom, patience in adversity, and confidence in His faithfulness. Ultimately, trusting God's timing transforms our perspective on help. We stop measuring it by immediacy or convenience and begin to measure it by effectiveness and divine orchestration. Even when relief seems delayed, we can rest assured that God is working behind the scenes, preparing the perfect answer that will bring true resolution. Help always comes, but it comes according to a timetable that is far wiser than our own. Waiting becomes not a burden, but a sacred space where faith deepens, hope grows, and the certainty of God's intervention becomes undeniable. When life overwhelms us and we feel the weight of our struggles, it can be easy to imagine that help must come as a dramatic, unmistakable miracle, a lightning bolt of divine intervention, or an instant solution that leaves no doubt of God's involvement. Yet, much of God's help comes in ways that are subtle, ordinary, and even unexpected. God often chooses to work through the circumstances around us and through the people He places in our lives to bring relief, guidance, and provision. To recognize this requires spiritual awareness and a willingness to see His hand moving even in the seemingly mundane or coincidental moments of our days. Consider for a moment the circumstances you face. Sometimes what appears to be a challenge or obstacle may actually be God's instrument of help. A closed door at work might be saving you from a greater mistake. A sudden detour in your plans may be opening the path to something far better than you had imagined. A delay that feels frustrating could be providing the extra time needed for preparation, growth, or protection. God's help is not always immediate or obvious, but it is intentional, even when it arrives in forms we do not immediately recognize. Learning to discern His movement through life's circumstances requires patience, faith, and a willingness to trust that He is orchestrating events for our ultimate good. Equally important is the way God uses people to provide help. Human beings are often the vessels through which divine assistance flows. A friend who calls at the right moment, a mentor who offers guidance, a stranger who shows unexpected kindness. These interactions are not random. They are divine appointments, moments where God chooses to meet our needs through the hands, words, and hearts of others. Recognizing this requires us to be alert and receptive, to see the presence of God in the people around us, and to be willing to accept help even when it comes from unexpected sources. God's provision is often relational, reminding us that we are not meant to face life alone, and that our connections with others can serve as channels of His care and support. It is also vital to remember that help through circumstances and people often accompany mez gradually. It may unfold over time rather than arriving all at once. A series of small, seemingly ordinary events can build toward a solution, teaching us to trust God's process and to remain faithful even when immediate relief is not apparent. This is part of His wisdom. He knows that slow, steady provision not only solves the problem, but also shapes our character, deepens our faith, and teaches us to rely on Him more fully. We begin to understand that God's help is not merely about removing our difficulties, but about transforming us through the journey itself. Scripture is filled with examples of God working through people and circumstances to provide help. Joseph, though imprisoned unjustly, ultimately found himself in a position to save his family and many others from famine. Esther, a young woman in a foreign land, was placed in the palace at precisely the right time to deliver her people. In the New Testament, the disciples encountered countless moments where their needs were met through ordinary people, such as the woman at the well or the generosity of those who supported Jesus' ministry. These examples remind us that God's help often comes through the ordinary and through the people and events we might initially overlook. Recognizing God's hand in circumstances and people also requires humility. It asks us to acknowledge that our own understanding is limited and that our way of solving problems is not always God's way. We may feel inclined to reject help or fail to notice it because it does not fit our expectations. Yet, God's wisdom is infinite and His methods are beyond our comprehension. Accepting His help in these forms teaches us to surrender control, to trust in His sovereignty, and to appreciate the divine orchestration behind every encounter and every event. Finally, when we become aware that God often works through circumstances and people, it transforms our perspective on life. Challenges are no longer merely obstacles to endure, they become opportunities to witness God's provision. Interactions with others are no longer routine, they become potential encounters with His grace. By cultivating awareness and gratitude, we learn to see the ordinary as extraordinary, to recognize God's fingerprints in every twist and turn, and to understand that help is always present, even if it arrives in ways we did not anticipate. This understanding brings peace and reassurance in the midst of difficulty. It reminds us that we are never truly alone, that God is always at work, and that every situation, every person, and every moment has the potential to carry His help and His blessing. Even when the path is unclear, God's provision is already in motion, carefully arranged to meet our needs and GUI us according to His perfect plan. Life has a way of testing the heart. Circumstances sometimes become so overwhelming, challenges so relentless that tears flow freely and despair feels close at hand. It is in these moments when the human spirit is stretched to its limits that faith becomes not just a comfort, but a transformative force. Faith has the power to take our deepest sorrows and turn them into hope, to take the weight of our despair and convert it into expectation for God's intervention. It is faith that allows us to see beyond the immediate pain, to recognize that tears are not the end of the story, but the beginning of a journey toward restoration, strength, and joy. Faith does not deny the reality of pain. It does not tell us to ignore sorrow or to pretend that our hearts are not breaking. On the contrary, faith acknowledges our tears, meets them with honesty, and places them in the context of a loving God who sees every struggle and cares deeply about every wound. When we approach life's challenges with faith, our tears become a sacred language of communication with God. They are the expression of a heart that trusts Him enough to pour out its sorrow, knowing that He is listening, knowing that He is near, and knowing that He will act in His perfect time. Faith transforms the act of crying from one of despair into an opportunity for divine intimacy and reassurance. Faith also changes the way we interpret circumstances. Without faith, tears can feel like death, a confirmation that life has overwhelmed us. With faith, however, tears become evidence of life, of sensitivity, and of the human need for God. They are a signal that we are open to His presence, that we are ready to receive His comfort and guidance. Faith allows us to see that even in the midst of darkness, God is at work, orchestrating events, opening doors, and preparing solutions that may be invisible to the human eye. Tears are no longer a symbol of hopelessness. They become the medium through which hope begins to take root in the soul. The transformative power of faith lies in its ability to redirect our focus from the problem to the provider. When our attention is consumed by pain, we risk becoming blind to the ways God is working in our lives. Faith shifts our gaze from the tears themselves to the one who can turn those tears into testimony, sorrow into strength, and loss into gain. This shift in perspective does not remove the difficulties immediately, but it infuses the heart with confidence that God is present, that His plan is unfolding, and that His help will come. Faith transforms our
I'll be all right. You don't have to stay. If you've already chosen, I won't stand in your way. I can feel it in your distance, in the way you barely speak, like your heart is somewhere else now, somewhere I can't reach. I was trying just to hold us while you slowly slipped away. Now I'm left with all the silence you didn't want to say. Maybe I just held on to something already gone. I'll be fine, you can leave. You don't owe me anything. If your heart has found a way out of what we used to be, I'll be fine, don't look back. I'll survive this empty space. Not tonight, maybe not soon, but I'll learn to be okay. We don't need to fake the feeling, I can see it in your eyes. There's no reason left for staying when the love already died. Through the quiet in your voice, I can hear your choice. I'll be fine, you can leave. You don't owe me anything. If your heart has found a way out of what we used to be, I'll be fine, don't look back. I'll survive this empty space. Not tonight, maybe not soon, but I'll learn to be okay. I don't need a reason why, I can see it in goodbye. And it breaks me, yeah, it does, but I won't ask you to stay. I'll be fine, you can leave. You don't owe me anything. If your heart has found a way out of what we used to be, I'll be fine, don't look back. I'll survive this empty space. Not tonight, maybe not soon, but I'll learn to be okay. I'll be all right.